This is the Worldly Wellbeing podcast. I'm Holly.
And I'm Luke.
We invite guests on this podcast to explore themes of worldly wellbeing. And by listening today, you're joining the conversation.
We are really delighted to welcome back Liz, who's joining us for another episode of the Worldly Wellbeing podcast. I think Liz is the first person we're inviting back to do a second episode. So you know you are in for a real treat. I'm really looking forward to diving into this episode because Liz, as always, will undoubtedly guide us into a really thoughtful space. So let's see what's in store.
I'm ready for a little bit of Liz therapy. Let's go.
Good evening, Holly and Liz.
Hello, good evening. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Lovely to see you again, Liz.
I know, not seen you for a while. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm happy to see your face again.
Thank you. Love to see both.
And yours, Luke, as always.
As of course, I mean, that just goes without saying. And I was about to say, it's weird to be recording this of an evening time. When we said good evening, I was like, this is strange because it's a different context. Normally as much sunshine as we usually get in this country, but usually there is daylight, and we are recording it when it is very much, although it's only coming out 5:30, very much wintry, cold darkness outside.
I feel a bit cocooned, but I'm also excited because I know that a conversation with Liz is going to make me feel warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
No pressure.
That's what you're hoping for.
So, Liz, it's really lovely to welcome you back. Thank you for joining us again. I was listening to our first episode with you earlier. I was doing my professional research bit and just reminding myself of our previous conversation. And there was so much that struck me from that. So, listeners, I would encourage you to go and take a listen again to that episode. But I just wondered, as we kind of move into our time together, what has been on your mind recently? What have you been thinking about? What have you been doing?
Gosh, what have I been thinking about? I've still been a bit existential, I think, for the last year. What are we doing? Where are we going? What's important? What's not important? An upside for me of this pandemic has been the ability to move house and to finally put myself by the sea. So a great period of change for me. I'm very grateful that the change in, working patterns and commuting has enabled me to transfer my work online and has provided new opportunity. So, and I'm sure we all know of many people probably have been changing jobs or working out what they want and what they don't want. So always looking for the good in what at times has been an incredibly challenging and dark period, but always looking for that light and remembering that we need light and dark. We need the dark to remember the light, and we need the light, to connect with the dark bits. Life is those bits together, I think.
I'm pleased you've made it to the sea, Liz, because there's something probably many listeners know. Luke and I were brought up in the same hometown, which is by the sea, and I think there's something that always sticks with you. I'm very much a city person, but I need to be by the sea several times a year, and there's something about that big expanse of nothingness. Well, not nothingness, but that clear view all the way to a horizon.
Yeah,
you can't beat that.
I think also for me it's the rhythm. So I live opposite the river, so just noticing every morning, is the river in? Or is the river out? And then going round to the sea. What's the sea doing? And despite whatever I'm doing in my life, nature's still doing whatever nature needs to do. The moon is still pulling in those tides every day, twice a day. And that's been a really great way of just really feeling grounded, just knowing that there's something greater than us that continues to run as the background motor in a way. I just find that reassuring, and that helps keep me stable a lot of the time.
Yeah, and for me as well, there's a kind of an orientation, an orienteering element to it. And I often joke that in London I get really lost because there's not a big body of water behind me. If I know the sea's behind me, then I know everything else is the other way. And that's a bit of a flippant remark, but it's true in a way. There's something about nature and the presence of things like the sea, or huge great open fields, or things like that are grounding and do help orient us, help us with our kind of sense of direction and sense of what you were just articulating about grounding, but also about then how do we move forward as well, like in what setting our direction of travel maybe.
Nice. I'm sort of thinking about the rhythm. There's a rhythm to it.
And then the interesting thing about that is that we're using something that in itself, nature is innately stable and unmoving, as a way for us to create movement or to journey. It's like that sort of...
Yeah, so this sort of sense that I like to work with. I run these seasonal reflection workshops with a colleague of mine, Doug Montgomery. And the idea that we work with, as we were speaking the last time when we were on this call, is whatever's going on in nature is actually reflected inside of all of us. And I do feel that man, woman, human being has lost that connection. We think we're something different or better than or not connected with. And I think that's a really big mistake. And I think noticing what's going on with the seasons can just help bring us back to the now. So when the world is rocking and rolling again, which it is at the moment with all the talk around this new variant, just coming back to nature, coming back to now, coming back to this moment, not worrying about what's going to be said at 6 o'clock tonight or 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, but what's in this moment, I think is really important.
Yeah, and that idea of nature and coming back to a better connection with nature so that perhaps we can better understand ourselves and others is something that I've been trying to kind of understand more of, particularly this past year with, as you said, the opportunities that some of us, not all of us, some of us have been presented to throughout the various lockdowns in the UK, been able to reconnect with different rhythms and different patterns of life and also nature. But also something that the kind of contemporary philosopher, thinker, writer, Charles Eisenstein talks a lot about in this idea of often the way that we try and fix the world's problems are by distancing ourselves from nature, by removing ourselves from the organic and the real and the kind of earthy. The way that we're trying to fix climate change is by coming up with new ways to sustain our current lives and keep them carbon neutral, when actually what we should be doing is, well, how can we restore ecosystems and how can we bring life back into small pockets of nature that in turn will have an impact? And I think we need to start asking those questions of ourselves too. Where are the ecosystems in ourselves, in our lives, that we need to tend to, that we're trying to fix with a magic kind of modern day technological wand, but actually they're suffering because of that?
Yeah, and perhaps as human beings, we're not giving ourselves the chance to restore, repair, and recover because we're all too busy going on with the next thing. I'm kind of thinking, I was in the co-op the other day, and I think it was broccoli I was buying, and there was one packet of broccoli from somewhere like Suffolk and one packet of broccoli from Ethiopia or somewhere, and I'm thinking, how are these two things even possible in the same container? And what are we doing to the world, to get both of those packets into the supermarket in shore and by sea? Because we're just so focused on what it is that we want all the time that I'm not sure we're taking stock of, I don't know, what we've got and who we are. I think also for me, winter is really a time for coming home. It's a time for hunkering down, putting the lights on. You were talking at the beginning about doing this on the evening and, coming in, tucking up. And sort of, I love working with the idea of trees. I think trees are a real visible representation of the inner transformation and the inner transition that's going on right now. So on one superficial level, we've probably got the heating on or the fire on, or, the people talking about, putting the films on and whatever they may be doing. But what the trees are doing, most of them now haven't got any leaves on them, so they've shed their leaves. And the trees are really, really busy at the moment. They're really busy making sure that their roots are really being taken care of. And I'm just curious about what are we doing to take care of our roots. And if we don't take care of those roots and we have shallow roots, then we'll get uprooted, which is what happens to trees when there are storms and high winds. Their roots aren't deep enough. And what the trees are also doing at the moment is they're taking care of their tap root. So their tap root is the way they get all the nutrients and the water they need to keep them alive. So how are we taking care of our roots? What does our root ball look like? And what parts of us need to be taken care of? So again, if we work with the idea of the garden, which we worked with last time, a lot of gardeners now will be putting netting over or bringing more delicate plants in from the garden, perhaps putting them in the greenhouse or sticking them in the shed or wherever they're putting them. So what tender parts of us need a little bit more care and attention rather than striding out in the world and keeping going? How are we taking care of ourselves like the tree? I think is an important image to work with.
It's interesting that you mentioned roots, and that immediately makes me think of, and you said roots and returning, and that immediately makes me think of what this time of year means for me and for Holly too, but also for lots of other people, is that it's that going home. And I've always found that dichotomy really difficult to balance because I feel like I have multiple homes. So when I say I go home, I could be talking about going back to where my family is, or I could be talking about going to Albania, or I could be talking about my flat in London. But at this time of year, going back to my roots means reconnecting with my family, my parents, my siblings, my in-laws, my friends in that part of the country. And that is so, and I think that's why last year hurt so much, because I couldn't reconnect with my roots. I couldn't, that was a painful experience last Christmas. And so there's an anticipation, there's a hope, there's a prayerful, wishful clinging on that this year I do get to do that. And that might be because, and Holly and I could probably talk about this, that might be because we spend a lot of the year giving out, so not in the kind of altruistic sense maybe, but we spend a lot of energy and time doing, and Christmas is therefore the time of year where you can put the brakes on a little bit and reconnect and rest, and that going back to your roots thing I think resonates quite powerfully because of that.
It's interesting, isn't it? You're noticing the physical pain of not being able to be connected with your roots. And I think that's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that I also had a similar experience, like a lot of people probably listening to this, of not being connected. We're now threatened on the 20th of December with that happening again, and noticing what happens to us, that physical manifestation of not being able to be connected with our roots.
And am I imagining this? Am I right in saying that trees communicate with each other through their roots?
Yeah, they do.
Which is also a really lovely. I love that trees do that, but it kind of ties in with what we're saying, that our roots aren't just for ourselves. Yet they're part of us. Our roots are about connecting with others, and we need that. We need to have communication with others.
There's a beautiful book. It's a fiction book, but called The Overstory by Richard Powers, that talks about the kind of the legacy of specific trees in the United States, and the kind of the impact that the communication of those trees with each other, but also the communication of those trees with people, and how people have kind of rallied to defend those trees over the years. So that's just an aside. That's what that made me think of is read that book, because it's profound in its scope.
Yeah, it reminded me of that book too, and how the trees can alert each other if there's disease. If you go to Kew, they've actually got recordings of trees speaking to each other via their roots. Yeah,
incredible.
There's a whole ancient wisdom going on that we think we know better than, and most of us probably aren't aware of.
Yeah, it's profound, and I think it speaks to that. The roots communicate where there's pain, or when there's fear or concern, or when the trees need to adapt and change. And actually, that's just what we've been articulating as well about our experiences of needing to go back to the roots, whatever they are for you. They might not be your family unit, whatever that looks like in your hometown. It might be something else. But then I also think it speaks to a pain that others experience where there is a disconnect from your roots for whatever reason. So whether that's because of racism in the UK, or whether that's because of class divide or social inequality that's led to a disconnect from your roots, like the pain, the trauma of being disconnected from that I keep saying roots, that legacy, that history is profound, and that has to be internalized. You can't escape that.
Yeah, and carrying that on perhaps is becoming even more present in society, as you and I, Luke, have been speaking for a while around the division in society. Not to be political and not to get into vaccinations, but there is a lot of division. There's a lot of difference of opinion. There's a lot of opposing views and people taking views. So perhaps people you've been friends with or a relative with for a long time, those relationships and those roots start to come under threat because people are divided and separated. And when we need to take care of them, because when it's springtime, and the blossom starts coming out and the leaves start reappearing, we need to be able to bear the weight of what's on the branches. So each season prepares us for the next season. And each season leads us into the season we're in now. So I also love this idea, it's going to be winter tomorrow, isn't it? The 21st of December. So we're truly going to be in winter. And just also noticing that we're approaching the end of the year. And this idea for me of gathering in, it's been another really difficult year for people. And I always say to people, just notice how far notice how far you have come and the things we're still being asked to do and the choices we're having to make or whatever having to give up, whatever it may be. But in amongst all of that, what are we gathering in? What are we really appreciating? What are we really grateful for? What's been happening in the previous 11 months that's allowed us to be here at the end of the year in month 12? So what are we gathering in and keeping hold of? I think a little bit working with the trees again, thinking about all the leaves that have come off the trees. What are we letting go of? What can we now set down? What don't we need anymore? What doesn't serve us anymore as we start a new season and we head into a new year? So what is our intention? What quality might we be wanting to take with us into 2022 to sustain us?
And Liz, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or advice for it. I think it's quite easy for us to think, oh, there will be a new season. And we often use that sort of language, which is, oh, next year things will be better. It's a new chapter. And that sort of course, hope is good. But I think sometimes we must sort of rely on that. Oh, the next thing will be better. And we've kind of learned in the last 2 years that might not be the case. And I think I probably speak for a lot of people that there's a real, and we spoke about this earlier before recording, this feeling of maybe trepidation that maybe it's not going to suddenly be all better. It's quite unlikely to. So how do we wrestle with those? How do we wrestle with that?
Interesting, isn't it? How do we wrestle with that? I always think having your New Year's resolutions for the year always seem like a really big thing to be deciding. And I'm useless at making choices. I was always worried I was going to be choosing the wrong thing, not kind of realizing I could change my mind as the year went on because they weren't really set in stone. I think what I've been doing recently is chunking that down and going back to the tides and nature and the moon. The moon gives us an opportunity to reset our intentions each month. So a full moon is a lovely way, and there's various things you can do for your moon meditation, but the full moon gives us an opportunity to acknowledge completion. So again, what are we grateful for? What have we achieved? Where are we at? What are we proud of? Whatever the words might be that work for you. So let's acknowledge the month of what's happened, what's completed. And on the new moon, we have an opportunity each month, 12 times a year, to look at what we want to do differently, or what we might try, or what we might experiment with, or what we might change. So I think I would be keeping it super light and allowing it to be fluid, rather than I've got to make this big decision to lose 6 stone in weight on the 1st of December, which is never going to happen, as we know. But just being gentle with ourselves. And I think even a friend of mine was saying that they set an intention of equality every day. So if their intention is to be, I don't know, joyful, they will ask Mrs. Amazon to play music that is related to that quality. And that's what they do to set themselves up for the day, of an intention, a light intention for the day, rather than this big ambition. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think that really does, because making things into more manageable chunks is, I mean, I find that quite helpful. Maybe not everyone does, but I think we need, when we don't know what 3 months' time, 6 months' time looks like, let alone, well, actually, we have no idea what next week looks like at this point. But rather than trying to set an intention or set our hopes on something that really we just have no idea about, keeping those sort of things smaller and knowing, I love this moon idea. I just want us to have more cloudless skies so we can fully
actually see it.
Yeah, actually see what's going on.
You should come back to the sea, because you see it quite a lot around here.
I think it's about that reframing of the narrative, isn't it? It's about rejecting this idea of societal goals and pressures on you have to achieve this at this point by, if you've not ticked off your New Year's resolutions by the end of the year, you failed. If you've not hit this milestone by this age, you failed. If you've not had, if you've not progressed to this specific job title with that salary, then you failed. But actually it's about saying, well, I don't want to operate in those parameters anymore. And what parameters are life-giving and healthy, what ones that enable me to flourish. And I'm someone that does need some level of structure and guidance. I value that, and I value having kind of something to work towards, but perhaps not reducing it, but taking it month by month or even day by day is a helpful framework.
And I think, building on that, Luke, I think it's about being gentle. It's not about what everybody else wants us to do. It's about what's important and what we're comfortable with for ourselves. And I think, for me, I think there's a message in here of being gentle. We're not very good at rest and recovery. We're very focused on, if I'm on the sofa watching the telly, I feel my phone should be at the side of me. If I'm on the phone speaking to someone, I feel I should be also texting somebody else. Rest and recovery, particularly at this time of year, is really, really important. And rest and recovery is when we crunch our own data. So when we're at rest, it's not that we're not doing anything, we're processing.
So how, not to sound silly, but what does that look like? How do we do that?
Well, I think first of all is about removing ourselves from our phones. So and I'm not very good at this either. So even if we sort of say, I'm going to put my phone in one room while I'm in another room, or I'm not going to look at my phone for the next hour and a half whilst I'm watching This Is Us on Amazon Prime for the next 45 minutes, and allowing ourselves to be cut off, to be separated from, in order to be connected with ourselves. It's okay to watch the television. It's okay to listen to a piece of music. It's okay to read a book. It's okay to sit with a cup of tea and to stare into space. It is okay. We don't have to be on this treadmill of I should be doing this and I should be here and I should go there and I should.
Funny you say that about your phone, because the idea that we could then have Wi-Fi, A, on the underground, and B, now on flights. It was, for me, getting on a plane is like the one time when you just you're forced to switch off from your phone. But I think probably if we're all honest with ourselves, we actually quite appreciate that.
Yeah.
There was always something lovely about thinking, well, now I'm on that plane, no one can disturb me.
No one can get me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to love, a long haul flight, particularly when I was working back in the ad tech media context, knowing that I was not contactable for 10 plus hours. That was joyful.
So again, I think we probably come back into boundaries, don't we? So if the tube and the flight isn't giving us that anymore, what are my boundaries around when I'm on and when I'm off, and when I'm off for me? And what do I need? And different people need different things and different amounts of it.
Recently, as you both know, I managed to get myself some COVID. And I thought part of me hated the fact that I was stuck in. But you know what? I really, really needed that time. Mm-hmm. And the time that was even the time when I actually had rest and recovery was when I actually felt slightly ill from COVID and was so exhausted I really couldn't do anything. I reflected and thought I shouldn't have had to get to the point where I had to catch something
to stop
in order to stop.
Yeah, completely. And as you're speaking, Holly, it reminds me, I think it was John Whittington from Coaching Constellations the other day saying, if you don't take time to attend to your wellness, you'll have to find time to take care of your illness. And I've just gone a little bit funny in my tummy. It's words along those lines, which is basically, if you don't look after being well, then you'll be spending time looking after yourself being ill.
Yeah, I think I can
slightly attacked by that. But I think there are a number of things popping for me in different contexts where I'm hearing things from different people, but also in books, in TV shows that I like, where there's almost like this societal unconscious blossoming of actually we're missing the mark here. We're not taking care of ourselves. And I think at the moment there's still a big stumbling block, at least in the way for me. And that's around the management of other people's expectations and the negative connotation that rest has. So I've noticed a really interesting response. And when I've been kind of telling people, when people setting up meetings for January, and I'm like, I'm back online from X date, I'm taking some annual leave. And the response is like, you're so lucky, I'm so jealous, or it's so great that you can do that because I could never, I'm so busy, I could never do that. And it's like there's this weird like competition element to keep going until you physically can't go on anymore. And then there's a shaming element. And I know I've done it in the past where you shame other people for taking time off. And it's not like, I'm not taking a year out. I'm taking time off over Christmas. That shouldn't be revelatory. That shouldn't be shocking. But the responses I've had indicate that it is almost countercultural now to take off more than a handful of days. And I feel like I have to justify myself for that. And it's bizarre.
Yeah, it's not like, I must have a breakdown in order to have that time off. Or when people say, I never take a sick day. I'm like, love, what? Why? Like, you can't function properly if you're not feeling well. And, as someone who is now self-employed, I wish I'd taken more advantage of sick days.
Yeah. I'm just, as I was going to say, I think there's also a sense of, what do you mean you're on holiday? Because there's nowhere to go. So, so almost the definition of, what are you doing then if you're not at work kind of has got a bit blurred.
But that's also the question that I have to ask myself as well, is that when you live in a one-bedroom flat and you've been spent the last 2 years either you working from a one-bedroom flat as well, the space has taken on a whole new dynamic. So I'm like, actually, when I take time off, whatever that looks like, what do I do with it? How I can't sit and do nothing endlessly. I'm not wired that way.
Mm.
There's only so much exercise you can do. There's so many books that you can read. Realistically, there's only so much Netflix that you can actually watch. And that's a hard question. What does rest look like? I haven't figured that out yet. I've not got an answer as to what genuine rest looks like for me, because I get twitchy about 44 minutes into rest and have to do something else. And so that's, I don't think I'm going to unpack that in the next few minutes on this podcast, but I think that's a question that a lot of us might need to ask specifically for ourselves, is individually, what does rest mean for me? And it probably won't look the same as rest means for Holly or rest means for Liz. It might have similarity, but it will look different.
Yeah, rest might be going for a walk. Rest might be doing your yoga. Rest might be sitting with a friend having a cup of coffee. Rest might be spending half an hour extra in bed. Rest might be going to bed half an hour earlier.
Honestly, I just quite like sitting and just staring into space.
Well, that brings us into languishing. There was an article a few weeks ago around you're okay, you're not super stressed, but you're kind of not feeling quite right. And languishing seems to be the word that's coming into the mix right now, which is those moments I've just noticed I've been on the sofa for 15 minutes staring into space. I'm okay, but I hadn't quite realised I'd sort of drifted off somewhere. So languishing is good, I think. I think we just need to be kind. And I know that's an easy thing to say, but all these expectations, as you were saying, Luke, of other people on what we should and shouldn't be doing, what the government thinks we should and shouldn't be doing, what we think we should and shouldn't be doing, it's all too much. And I think again, going back to our gardens and our trees, is what are we making space for? And I think there's an element in here about making space for ourselves, because we get very overwhelmed by everybody else's agendas and expectations and lose ourselves a bit in there. And it's very easy to get lost, I think.
And sometimes I've really noticed this, because I know from myself, I might have an opinion or a strong opinion on something, but that changes. And in the same way, other people's expectations will change. And I know it's an obvious reminder, but not judging ourselves by other people's opinions.
Completely. And they may say in 3 months' time, I don't remember saying that to you, Holly. Did I say that? Did I say that? I thought it was a terrible thing you were taking holiday. And we hold all this value on these stories that people start projecting onto us. I mean, I think my invitation in this would be, what are they projecting onto you that they're not addressing in themselves?
And I think that's there's a stewardship element to all of this as well, in that we just being slightly more aware of what we're saying, when we're saying it, and how we're saying it actually would go a really long way. And off the cuff comments, whatever it's about, whether it's about government restrictions or whether someone's taking time off over Christmas, they actually can have impact on others. And actually, if, like you said, Liz, it sounds twee, but to come back to kindness, if we could just hold kindness as a guiding principle in how we say things, what we say and what we do, how we do it, then there might be less of this to unpack.
Yeah. And the other phrase that's coming up for me in this is, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
Oh, I love that. Gosh, that took me a worrying amount of time. I'm not an evening person. You probably saw my face and my eyes. Just had to get my head around that.
Those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
That's really nice. And, if we're honest, we're all everyone's vulnerable at the best of times. But given the last nearly 2 years we've had, we're all vulnerable, and we've all got that chink. There'll be a little chink in everyone's armor. It's all in different places. But I guess that's, like you're saying, Luke, that just treating people with kindness, because you don't know how big that chink is, or where it is,
or what it is, or which that they're carrying around with them today. You don't know, and we go around making all these projections and putting all these stories onto people when we don't know who we've been standing next to in the supermarket queue today, or who's been standing at the bus stop this afternoon. We've got no idea what's going on in people's lives.
And that busyness element talks to that as well, because it's really, I've done this myself, but it's really easy to just open your mouth and, for reactions and words to come out that you haven't processed, you haven't just stopped to think before they come out. And that part of this kind of society and way of living that we've had for a while and is almost pressured, even worse now, because when we are out and socializing or working, there's so much in there that wants to come out quickly and make the most of time. But just pausing before you say something.
Well, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?
There's something that I kind of wanted to offer probably as we draw this particular episode to a close. And it's a poem that I think I've shared with you both at different times, but also that was shared with me again recently, that kind of just resonates with the kind of the winter period that we're in and the ending of the year, given that it's called At the End of the Year. But I think it might have some takeaways for people that tie into what we were talking about right now. So if you'll entertain me and kind of let me have this moment, I'll just share the words from John O'Donoghue called At the End of the Year. As this year draws to its end, we give thanks for the gift it brought and how they became inlaid within, where neither time nor tide can touch them. The days when the veil lifted and the soul could see delight, when a quiver caressed the heart in the sheer exuberance of being here. Surprises that came awake in forgotten corners of old fields, where expectation seemed to have quenched. The slow, brooding times when all was awkward and the wave in the mind pierced every sore with salt. The darkened days that stopped the confidence of the dawn. Days when beloved faces shone brighter with light from beyond themselves, and from the granite of some secret sorrow, a stream of buried tears loosened. We bless this year for all we learned, for all we loved and lost, and for the quiet way it brought us nearer to our invisible destination.
Beautiful. Thank you, Luke. And just noticing those words, kind of really reflecting back what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Liz, for your time with us again on the Wellbeing podcast. It's one of those things where it now has opened up so many avenues of so many other conversations, but we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, but thank you for joining us, Liz.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, and take care of your root balls and noticing what you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, let's go tend to our root balls then, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Go well, both of you.
Well, I don't know about you, Luke, but actually recording a podcast in the evening and recording something with Liz has just made me feel just so ready to sit and just be. I feel like I might go light a candle and, at some point maybe get out the yoga mat later to just find that space of rest that Liz was articulating. But I also think it does prompt some quite difficult, niggly questions that actually many of us might want to start asking of ourselves more deliberately around those things that we're unpacking. And I think, there's a kind of a surface level that you can take from this episode and sit with gently, but also perhaps some more rigorous work that we might like to do with ourselves to kind of unpack that a little bit more. We've been poked with a stick as well. Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of, there's almost a yin and yang to that. There's a balance in that too. And that's, what we've really been expanding on over the last, really kind of since we started, but especially the last 2 seasons, is that balancing journey. So thank you, Liz, for your wisdom as always, and for being so thoughtful and articulate. We really value it. And off the back of that, we're heading into the festive season. Yes.
And it's this is the last episode of the season.
So, we would like to just first of all wish everybody a wonderful time in whatever way you are celebrating or not celebrating. And we're looking forward to a new year and another season coming up.
Absolutely. I completely echo that. Christmas wishes. I'm always cautious about wishing Merry Christmas at this time of year because it can be complicated for some people and not everyone engages. But I think the spirit of Christmas, that hope, that peace, that rest, maybe offering that as a wish to everyone is a good thing to do.
Go hug a tree.
Find your roots or something. Do find us on Instagram at Wellbeing. We'll be sharing over the kind of break between this season and the next some of our older episodes for you to engage with and enjoy. And you can obviously find us on our website as well. Review, like, subscribe, all of those good things because we want more people to engage with the wonderful guests that we have on the Wellbeing podcast. But I think, Holly, that might be all from us from this season.
I think it is. So over and out for season 4.
Peace and love to you all.